everyone present here. Hello, sir.
Yeah, good evening.
Good evening, sir. Hello, hi, everyone present here. Welcome you all to the Voices from the Periphery. I am Odisha Doloi, and hereby we all sit together to enlighten ourselves today. And today's theme is Changing Nature in Sea Trade by none other than Professor Ranabir Chakravarti. Ranabir sir has been Professor Emeritus, Center for Historical Studies, School of Social Sciences, Jawaharlal Nehru University. His books include Trade and Traders in Early Indian Society 2007, Exploring Early India 2010, Macmillan publication, Indian Judaic Studies in the 21st Century, A View from the Margins 2007, and The Pull Towards the Coast and Other Essays, The Indian Ocean History and the Subcontinent Before 1500 CE 2020. So I hope everyone is ready with all ears to enrich themselves with today's topic. And I now request Sir to carry forward today's evening. Thank you. On to you, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm very deeply grateful to the organizers for so very kindly asking me to speak on a subject which is very favorite of mine, but I'm slightly a little bit hesitant because I might step into the time, also the areas far beyond my usual familiarity with the scenario up to 1300. But before I begin, first I must thank all the participants and the entire member of the audience, and also to Odisha for a very kind introductory statement about me. Only one small correction. Technically, my designation would be I'm a retired professor from JNU. I used to teach as professor of ancient history. I'm not an emeritus professor of the Center for Historical Studies. There is only Professor Emeritus, one single, she is Professor Amila Thapar, not me. So that's one. And so let me, before I, now, please tell me, I have a PowerPoint, so I go to the present now, and what do I have to do? This is select.
Sir, you can press, there's a small icon there in the task bar. It says present now.
Yes, I have seen it, and then there is, just let me see. This is the present now, yes, and then I say share. What do I share? Entire screen, I think. Entire screen, and then what do I? Just a moment. I'm usually pretty bad in these things. Now it is share, and now I can go to my slide, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We can see, sir. We can see your presentation.
Has it come already? Because
yes,
I have not shown anything.
Yes, sir. The screen has come.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Just tell me if it has come on the view. Has it?
Yes, sir. It has.
Good.
It's perfect,
Thank
sir.
you very much. Now I can start. So this is. I hope I'm clearly audible.
Absolutely, sir.
Yeah. So this would be my topic of discussion today. I've slightly modified what the organizers, particularly Ayush, sent me. I shall explain. I have mentioned it the changing nature of Indian Ocean maritime networks from the what was originally suggested, particularly by Ayush. I am very thankful to him for taking the initiative. That is trade, the sea trade in the early medieval and into the medieval. First of all, I'm not very always comfortable with the tripartite time division following the European historiography model that everything is ancient, medieval, and modern. And now we are hearing of the postmodern and postcolonial. I usually do not go by the time of this three divisions of chronology. That cannot be an universal phenomenon and on an equal scale. I have used the term early medieval times concerning the Indian Ocean networks and also with a particular focus on South Asian subcontinent starting roughly from 600, and then I have left it deliberately the term beyond because I might go almost over a millennium from 600 to into the 17th century. I must confess in the very beginning, I am usually no expert at all, no familiarity beyond the time of 1500. After 1500, I can manage a little bit, but beyond 1500, it is too vast, too complicated a scenario, and I have no access to any of the major European primary source language, and I have never checked the primary source documentation from the European sources, that of the Portuguese, the Dutch, the English we can manage, but I'm not familiar with the English East India Company records or when the India became directly under the control of the British Crown. I'm not familiar with these things, and definitely I'm not familiar with the French documentation. So anything beyond 1500, I shall mainly talk on the basis of my readings of published materials. Before that, up to 1500, I have some familiarity or more familiarity with the primary sources and the historiography. So please keep this point in view. So by beyond, I might get into 1600, 1700 times, and do please bear with me if I falter, because there is every possibility that I might falter after the centuries after 1500. Now, before I get into the actual discussion, why shall I begin from the early medieval? It is not that the Indian Ocean history starts only from the early medieval, which in Indian context is placed around 600 CE onwards, 600 to 1300, typically the early medieval segment of chronology. I'm not getting into the details of it. It is seen by all major scholars, whether following the famous Indian feudalism model or those who oppose Indian feudalism model, starting say from R.S. Sharma, D.N. Jha, K.M. Shrimali, vis-a-vis B.D. Chattopadhyay and B.N. Mukherjee, and many a host of other scholars who do not see Indian feudalism, but all the scholars view that from 600 to 1300, there took place very major change in almost all way of life in the subcontinent, including politics, socio-economic development, and cultural activities. The major point is the emergence of regional character regional features, argumentations by the proponents of Indian feudalism, notably by Professor the late lamented R.S. Sharma, following him, they generally seen that economically speaking, the period 600, 1300 essentially emerged before us as remarkable expansion of rural agrarian society, but perhaps also to the detriment of trade, particularly long distance trade, both overland and overseas. In fact, the shrinkage of trade, particularly long distance trade, is seen as both as a cause and a result, cause and consequence of the remarkable spread of the rural agrarian expansion settlements all over the subcontinent. Now, this is a problematic scenario. Particularly, I would show you that there is no major shrinkage in trade, including long-distance Indian Ocean network. There may not be immediately from 400 to 600, something analogous to the very vibrant trade of the subcontinent with the Eastern Mediterranean zone, that is with the eastern part of the Roman Empire, which has been discussed in tomes. I'm not getting into it. Yes, after 250, there was a lull in the trade with the Mediterranean, particularly with the problematic scenario with the Roman Empire, but that does not mean that trade virtually took a back seat. Now, with this background, I'm talking, let us familiarize ourselves with the Indian Ocean. Now, this is, if you put on the globe, this is the only and unique ocean which is an enclosed sea space, because to the north of that, you have the Indian subcontinent, a vast landmass of Asia, and because there is the enclosed sea, because there is the massive Himalayan mountain ranges that actually obstructs the Indian Ocean any further north. And you have two major sea lanes on the west, that is the Persian Gulf, you can see in the map, and also the Red Sea, and on the east, the Southeast Asian areas, both the mainland Southeast Asia and the maritime Southeast Asia. And this is, Indian Ocean is the third largest ocean, smaller than the Pacific and the Atlantic, but still it is occupying nearly 20% of the total maritime space of the planet. And here you can see that the vastness of the Indian Ocean, particularly the southern sector, after say the Cape of Good Hope, there is, after the east coast of Africa ends, there is a vast chunk of the Indian Ocean, the southern sector of the Indian Ocean, right up to the western coast of Australia, where you do not see much landmass. Please keep this in mind, because we have to address this point. The most important factor of unity bound what actually bound together the Indian Ocean network is the dependence on the alteration of the monsoon wind system. I'm not getting into the details. You all know the alterations of the summer monsoon to the winter monsoon, from the southwest to the northeast monsoon. But the important point is there is no operation of the geographical, natural, climatic phenomenon of monsoon to the south of the 10 degrees latitude. So that's why I said the vast chunk of the Indian Ocean is actually, the southern sector is outside the monsoon-oriented seafaring, and therefore will remain invisible for a very major part of our discussion from the Indian Ocean network, the sea trade in the Indian Ocean. We shall mainly talk of the northern sector of the Indian Ocean. Keeping the Indian subcontinent in our particular position, in the vantage point, it is not merely an Indo-centric discussion. To replace what you are well familiar with called the Eurocentric understanding of the Indian Ocean, particularly from the late 19th, early 20th century, when the major scholarship on the Indian Ocean always considered that because of the outside stimuli coming from the European interventions and initiative through trade, partly politics, even before mid-18th century, that opened up the Indian Ocean and took it almost on a global scale, linked up with the Atlantic. That view I am not proceeding with, but I am also not positing an Indo-centric position of the Indian Ocean narrative to counter an Eurocentric position. I'm not in favor of the Eurocentric explanation of the Indian Ocean scenario, but that is not to be replaced with a merely Indo-centric nationalistic position. I'm talking of the Indian Ocean, first of all, that is more familiar with, the land is more familiar with all of us. And secondly, the Indian Ocean stands along with Sri Lanka, particularly the spot of Trincomalee in Sri Lanka, at the very center of the Indian Ocean. And the monsoon-driven network of the Indian Ocean will give a very major importance to the two coastlines of the subcontinent, which were, of course, dotted with numerous ports. We shall talk about those a little bit later. But one thing also is to be highlighted here. When one talks of the India's subcontinental situation vis-a-vis the Indian Ocean, one has to mainly look at the peninsular part of India, not the typical North Indian scenario. This is the standard, almost hackneyed presentation of Indian history, particularly for the pre-modern period, that everything is to be understood in the background of the landlocked Ganga Valley or the North Indian plains. North Indian plains and Ganga Valley virtually is a landlocked space. Only when the coastal areas are accessible, and on the two sides to the Western Indian Ocean and Eastern Indian Ocean, through the two coastlines, when you get into the peninsular part of India. So that part should be taken into consideration. The other point, before I proceed, I have some images. This is the 13th century painting. You can easily see here the typical Indian Ocean ship, starting from the Red Sea area, the Persian Gulf area, the greater parts of the subcontinent, down up to Sumatra area, not Java really, and the eastern coast of the Bay of Bengal region. That this is the typical ship I have delivered. There are many instances of this kind of ships prior to 13th century. Since there is a thrust on early medieval, I have chosen this 13th century painting. It is made of wooden planks, and which are stitched together, almost literally stitched together with coconut coir. Please keep it in mind that both the raw materials are abundant in the subcontinent on both the coastal areas. And this kind of ships would dominate the Indian Ocean seafaring till the advent of steam navigation. And you can see the continuity of this. This an image, the typical, only nowadays, this photograph was taken in 2011, early 2011, you find the typical fishing vessels, and behind you have the trawler, the larger ship, the fisher folks ships. Only two major changes. They are using, instead of coconut coir, nylon and plastic threads, and these vessels are fitted with a diesel motor boat. Otherwise, the basic structure still remains the same. I deliberately give you a quick glance over the ports. These are not all the ports. You can see there are several ports between 1000 and 1500 CE, that is in the first half of the second millennium, CE, which obviously do not give any idea of the shrinkage of long distance trade from the subcontinent into the subcontinent. And now, since we talked about the map, the regular seafaring and seafaring in the Indian Ocean, not the Indian Ocean, I mean, is indicated by this originally prepared in 11th century under the at Baghdad under the Abbasid Caliphate. This is the map of the Indian Ocean in a collection of maps which in English should be translated as the Book of Curiosities. It was made first in Baghdad, the Persian, then shifted to Cairo, then under the Fatimid Caliphate of Egypt, and then it was copied definitely by 13th century. The map is almost like a bathtub, because this is definitely not the typical map on cartographic principle of the Indian Ocean, and the orientation is quite different. One has to understand that the north is actually down below, which we don't do in modern maps, and the south is on the top. The southern direction is on the top. So there are the major ports, including ports of the Indian subcontinent, which have been shown in this map. But please keep it in mind, this has been mentioned in English. This lies in Bodleian Library in Oxford, and it's called the Book of Curiosities. I'm not getting further into details. I talked about the Fatimid Caliphate. For the understanding of the Indian Ocean, as I said, we are taking a particular view of the subcontinent, but it is not Indo-centric at all, because this is, as I talked of Egypt, this is the map of the Fatimid Caliphate that came into being in 969 AD. You can easily see its mark as the Fatimid Caliphate, and controlling, not really controlling, but their presence is felt in the Red Sea area. And it is obviously in the Baghdad area, which is in the Persian Gulf zone. You have the presence of the Abbasid Caliphate, which was there for a fairly long time and which would remain up to 1258 till the Mongol conquest led to the collapse of the Abbasid Caliphate. Please note this, the position of the Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt and also the position of the Red Sea. There is no Suez Canal, but Suez as a site is there. And one has to now, from a port in the northernmost part of the Red Sea, then one has to take an overland and a riverine route to reach Alexandria. Moment one is in Alexandria, then the Mediterranean network opens up. So Egypt stands almost like a hinge, linking through the Red Sea, the Indian Ocean, with the Mediterranean, not by an all-sea route, by a combination of a sea route, a overland route, and also partly a riverine route through the Nile. In the Fatimid Caliphate, we find a remarkable type of primary source material. This is called the Geniza. The Geniza is available in every Jewish synagogue. This is the synagogue of at Old Cairo, which is called Fustat, the capital of Egypt. And in this Geniza, which actually is a vast waste paper basket, you can see there is a ladder through which one climbs, and it's a kind of a lumber room without any door, without any window. The Jewish custom does not allow anyone to destroy a paper, a letter, a court document on which the name of God appears. And in almost all documents, God would appear. Like in, say, people write Om Hari Durga Mata Sahai, like that. So they are not destroyed, but left, dropped in that Geniza, which is actually a vast waste paper basket. From that This was first noticed in late 18th century with the Napoleonic invasion of Egypt. The people understood that there's a vast treasure trove of fascinating Jewish materials, often of secular nature. And then at least there are 450 plus letters which talk about, say, between late 11th century to mid 13th century of travels by Jewish merchants to India, at least up to Aden, from Aden, India. And that's called the India traders, not Indian traders. These are the Jewish merchants who left. If you'd like to read a little bit more on that without even getting into documentation, you can read a wonderful novel by Amitav Ghosh, In an Antique Land, in 1990, and then a more recent, very scholarly work by Elizabeth Lambourne, published in 2018. It's called Abraham's Luggage. Now we have, in the form of the documents, about 458 letters, which is called the India book, India Traders of the Middle Ages, documents from the Cairo Geniza. And the greatest scholar is S.D. Goitain, whom I have mentioned. The important point here is you find, like no other archives, the regular seafaring right from the Jewish merchants are mainly starting from Cairo, then coming down to the Red Sea port, either of Kush or of what is Aidhab in the southern part of Egypt, then coming to sailing to Aden, the great Yemeni port, from there crossing the Arabian Sea with the monsoon winds and touching either the say the area of present-day Mangalore called Al-Manjarur, and then the greater parts of Malabar coast in Kerala, but also sometimes slightly even north in the around the region of Goa, or what is called the southern Kannada coast. What is most important, in no other documentation you find the actual voice of the merchants, the participating merchants, and with some kind of statistical details which virtually is not available prior to 1500 in the European documentation, statistical documentation of ports, of the custom duties, of the commodities, of the shipping. There's a plethora. Prior to that, it is only in the Geniza that kind of statistical hardcore information on trading network, on shipping patterns, and most importantly, the Indic elements participating in the sea trade. My main point is, please do not pay any attention whatsoever in any of the texts, whether published texts or in the ancient Shastras, that Indians did not actually take to the sea because of the Shastra's prohibition for it. The sea is seen as a pollutant and particularly affecting one's jati, Varna jati status. So there is a frowning against crossing the sea. That is only the vision of the Brahmanical Sanskrit treatises. The Geniza, and there are other sources, I'm not getting into details. There's a wonderful documentation of actual Indians taking to the sea, the Indian ship-owning merchants who sometimes were afloat, not merely controlling their business from the shore, but they were actually visiting distant overseas areas. And then perhaps the most interesting, the remarkable cultural diversity replete in these letters, that Jewish merchants, Muslim merchants, both in India, also in West Asia, in the Red Sea area, and then also the Indic merchants. There are sometimes disputes, court disputes, but there is no issues of any interfaith disturbances in these Geniza letters. In fact, these are fascinating documentation of how the coastal society is a fantastic exemplar of the accommodation of plurality and cultural diversity. I'm not getting into all the details, but I would point out here, largely the trade towards the Western Indian Ocean from India, where largely the commodities sent out from India and relatively less number of commodities being brought to India. That's why you get hoards of precious metal coins. Say, for example, the 13th century hoard of coins from Bharuch. You get Egyptians coin, you get Adani's coin, you get Zabti coins, and all precious metals along with the Delhi Sultanate coins. Why? Because India is seen almost as sink basin of precious metal coins, because goods are flowing out of India, the Indian commodities, but less non-Indic commodities are being brought to India. That pattern is always there. And I would very briefly touch upon another point. Please do not consider that long distance trade across the sea means only the exchange of precious commodities like muslin, like very precious jewels, pearls, diamond, the exotic spices, particularly the Kerala black pepper, which is called the black gold, very rightly so by Professor Romila Thapar. But it also requires the exchange of various commodities of daily necessity. And once again, the Geniza is full of that, along with the shipping of excellent red cloth from India called lalas, the red lalas cloth. You also have the shipping out from Indian ports, particularly from Kerala ports, at least 6 varieties of iron. In no other documentation we find that this kind of raw materials, basic heavy raw materials, are being shipped out. And this is absolutely central, because the ship merely consisting of small quantity luxury items won't be able to sail at all. It will sink. The ship becomes unviable for sailing in the high sea if the hold is not filled up with bulk materials. So the importance of daily necessity bulk commodities is of central importance. But one object India had to always import, that is the import of horses, war horses, which never good quality horses were bred in India right up to the early days, 18th century, mid 18th century, late 18th century days of the English East India Company. The experimentation of breeding good quality Indic horses by hybridization all failed, even in the late 18th century, undertaken by the English East India Company. And the areas that were mainly famous for the shipping out of horses were Kish in the Persian Gulf, very major center, Hormuz in the Kirman coast of present-day Iran. These two are on the Persian Gulf network, and on the Red Sea, the great port of Aden. This is one such scene captured in the late 16th century in a Tamil Nadu temple. Even the temple has this design. You can see the typical Indian Ocean ship, merchants on the deck, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 horses peeping out of the what may be called the hold. The ships from 1000 AD onwards tended to be transported overseas from the pre-1000 AD tendency to bring them through the northwestern extremities, that is mainly the Central Asian and West Asian horses, would be brought into the subcontinent, along with also the other conduit of overland horse supply was through the northeast. The Tibetan horses called Tangan would be brought through Yunnan in southern China and Bhamo in northernmost part of Myanmar through Manipur, and then also Bhutan, then into Brahmaputra Valley, then into Bengal. And from Bengal, it might go for other areas. Minajuddin very clearly describes this particular position, and we have the work of Bin Yang to enlighten more on the regular supply right into the Mughal times of the Tangan horses. The Tangan horses were not as pricey or as efficacious like the typical Arab and Persian horses, which are depicted here, but these were also being brought overland. But the overseas network of a horse, this is a major aspect of something being brought into India. An extremely precious commodity, meant particularly for the political elites who required it for an indispensable war machinery. And of course, it was also coveted by the economic elite. I would also take a little bit towards the Southeast Asian, East Asian network. You have a look at the eastern sector of the Indian Ocean dominated by the Bay of Bengal, with also the Andaman Sea coast, the Martaban area in northern part of Myanmar, and the very crucial the Strait of Malacca. After that, you have a gap. You can see the Strait of Malacca and the island of Sumatra. Then to the farther east, the island of Java. In between the two, you have the sea of this is the Sunda Strait. And from there, technically speaking, the Indian Ocean ends, and then it merges also with the South China Sea, and therefore you are entering into what is called the Indo-Pacific, Indian Ocean Pacific Rim, the Indo-Pacific Rim. You can easily understand that for taking this kind of a situation, it is useless to look merely at what is now the nation state of India. One has to give up any model of the nation state, because there was no nation state, what we are discussing now. And merely giving any vantage position to the subcontinent won't give us any particular advantage. And here you can also see that the cluster of major ports into the Eastern Indian Ocean, you have several ports right from Nagapattinam under the Cholas. Later also you have the Pandyan ports in the southernmost tip of the east coast, and then Visakhapatnam, the same name as it today in the Andhra coastal area. And then in the Bengal area, the premier port of Shatigam, which is called present-day Chittagong in Chattogram, in the southeasternmost part of Bangladesh. This area, the movement of ships are now brought to us in recent last 2 to 3 decades by the shipwreck archaeology. Of course, the shipwrecks were very unfortunate incidents, causing enormous loss of life and loss of commodities, loss of ships. This is a shipwreck that happened around early decades of the 9th century. How we know? Because of the pottery that was packed. I'll come to this. These are, you can see here how the pottery was packed in a very large storage jars. These are the Chinese ceramics, and these were filled right up to the brim of that big jar, so that they are so tightly packed that there would be very small percentage of breakage. In fact, and these are the types of the very large number of Chinese pottery, and you can easily see that it looks almost identical, almost monotonous. If one looks at it, one might, if you look even with a partial assemblage, you will feel after 10 minutes it's boring, because there is no diversion and variety of the design, which on the other hand means these were meant for bulk consumption. These were produced in a huge number of quantity, and the Chinese archaeology, particularly the ceramic analysis, has reached such a major point of efficacy that the pottery and their manufacturing area can be pinpointed. This was done from a place called Changsha in the interior of China. So from there, the ship in fact is a typical Indian Ocean ship. It is not a Southeast Asian ship, the like of which we shall show very soon. But this is an Indian Ocean ship. It was probably coming back from somewhere from China, and then it was reaching Southeast Asia, maritime Southeast Asia, close to the Java Sea, where it sank. And all its cargoes in one single ship, 55,000 of these kind of pottery pieces were there. And you can understand, therefore, the importance of the bulk commodities, not merely the precious commodity, the exotic item, very pricey, and of course, bringing enormous profit to the handling merchants. But these are the lifeline. It touches the needs of people far away from the rich clientele, the elite clientele, whether at the court or the commercial elites. Now, this is an important point, and we know that the Indian Ocean ship was capable of sailing beyond the limits of the Indian Ocean, probably coming from the Persian Gulf area. It could have touched the Indian coastal areas, then went to East Asia, and it was coming back probably to its home base when it sank. And if there are 55,000 of a single shipment of pottery, you also have very fine gold artifacts, but only very few in number. That is very normal. These would fetch enormous price, but they will be only handful in number, because the purchases of such exotic commodities in any society will be only a fragment, the upper crust, very thin upper crust of the consumers. And I'll show another shipwreck happening in the Java Sea at a Cirebon. These are, the photograph is not good, these are silver ingots, very heavy silver ingots with inscriptions in Chinese telling that this was meant for, this actually, this turned into silver ingots and shipped and kept on board of the unfortunate sailing ship from the revenue generated by taxes on salt production. Once again, salt is an indispensable item to quotidian life. It cuts across all sections of the strata of the community, of any community. It's an indispensable item. So salt production is often, even in China, in India also, it is a subject to taxation. So that taxation coming from salt is so high that one could transform it into silver ingots, and the ship was coming to Southeast Asia for the purchase of exotic spices. So the transfer from the taxes of an absolute essential indispensable item of quotidian life for purchase of exotic spices is an aspect. This is a typical aspect of the East Asian, Southeast Asian network. And once again, the inscribed Chinese text on the silver ingots would indicate the dating. It's about mid-10th century. And this is the Southeast Asian ship. It is there in the very famous sculpture of the Borobudur temple in Indonesia. And from the design, it has nothing to do with the typical Indian Ocean ship, which at least one you have seen in the very beginning. It's with an outrigger canoe, and it's a high sea sailing craft, and obviously it is sailing in kind of the gusty winds that you can very clearly imagine. I would continue with the Eastern Indian Sea. I would briefly take you to the Bengal area, the Gangetic Delta, the largest delta in the world. You can easily see particularly look at the yellow marked area, this is the uh, active delta zone, where you have the combination of the river Padma, the major branch of the river Ganga into Bangladesh, which is joined by the very powerful mighty river Brahmaputra, known in Bangladesh as Jamuna, and then also it is joined with another very large river, the Meghna. And this is the active delta region of the largest delta in the world, the Ganga Brahmaputra Meghna delta. And from 7th century, 8th century onwards, the earlier great port of Tamralipta dies down, but not indicating a complete reversal of the vibrant trade network, maritime trade network of the Bengal coast, particularly in the Bay of Bengal arena, linking both the eastern coast of the Bay of Bengal, the maritime, the mainland Southeast Asian areas, the coast of Myanmar, the coast of Thailand and Malaysia area, right into and giving the passage to the Strait of Malacca. But now the new port emerges. As I said, the place is called nowadays known as Chittagong Chattogram, located within, as a 10th century inscription categorically mentions, Novochattala, either the 9 segments joined together to form the port of Chattogram, or the newly emerging space, which would be called Chattogram, where within the Harikela region, the southeasternmost part of present-day Bangladesh, which is beyond to the east of the Meghna River, you have one area called Samatata, which is Noakhali Kumilla region, parts also of southern Tripura, what is called ancient Samatata, already known to us through the accounts of Xuanzang's visit in 7th century, early 7th century. Then Harikela, mentioned first by the Chinese traveler Yi Jing's account, Holai Kala, located in the easternmost part of eastern India. This is Harikela. How we know this? Through the coins. You may recall that in the perception of the shrinkage of trade, particularly fortified by the enclosed economy of the rural economy of early medieval times, as thought by R.S. Sharma, even before that Niharanjan Rai, by D.N. Jha, K.M. Shrimali, fabulous scholars, but they considered that since there was shrinkage of long distance trade, the validity, the requirement of precious metal currency gradually peters out and replaced by cowrie shells, with which, according to them, only small exchanges at local level can be performed, no long distance trade. To this general pattern comes the excellent silver currency, not gold currency, excellent silver currency, with the script written here, Harikela, not issued by any particular king or any particular dynasty. This is a non-dynastic currency, but it's excellent silver content. The metallic purity is very high, almost for 5 and 6 centuries, and the weight standard is pretty constant. There is only from about 10th century, the weight standard is oriented or is sort of put on the same bracket with the Arab dirham currency. These are all works by the pioneering works by Professor B.N. Mukherjee, my mentor, who actually brought to us the importance of the Harikela coins. And Harikela coins are not limited merely to the area around Chattogram. These are found right up to the southernmost part of what is Arakan, in northwestern areas of present-day Myanmar. It is found in Noakhali Kumilla region of Samatata. It has spread even up to the Kamarupa area in the in the what is called the Brahmaputra Valley in Assam. So the circulation of these coins has gone far beyond its area, what is marked on the coins, and where is mainly its minting was there. Obviously, it speaks of remarkable trade network. After all, the prominence of the port of Chattogram, which was visited in early 14th century by none other than Ibn Battuta. And then it travels through the riverine network in the typical active delta zone right up to Sylhet in Bangladesh, northeastern Bangladesh. And from there he comes to Gaur Pandua to meet the Sultan, comes back to what is called Sunur Kawan, that is Sonargaon near present-day Dhaka, then sails out with a Junuk, that is Chinese or Southeast Asian very heavy ship of junk. So the network can be seen very clearly here and through the riverine areas. And I'll talk about it, this particular, it's called in Chinese text as Shaki Jam. And Ibn Battuta would call it as Satkawa, that is not Sadgaon of West Bengal, but Chat, it becomes Sad. Kawa is Gawa, so Chattogram. That is very clearly evident and the premier position of the Bengal coastal situation. As I said of the visit by Ibn Battuta, why did he had to travel up northwards, upstream from Chattogram, Chittagong, into Sylhet area? He wished to meet a very famous Sufi saint, Shah Jalal. That would mean by the 14th century, yes, the Bengal Sultanate based in Gaur has already been established since 1205 May, when the Bakhtiyar Khilji conquered Lakhnauti from Lakshman Sen. But even before that, one of the major factors of the rise of Chattogram as Samandar, the port of Samandar, it's derived from the term Samudra, Samundar, Samandar, is because of the regular mentions in a large number of Persian and Arabic texts. I'm not getting the details, as the premier port of Bengal. In very recent times, an excellent editing of a new inscription coming from the present-day Bikrampur region of Bangladesh, which was part of ancient Bongo sub-region, comes a 7-line Sanskrit inscription issued by a local ruler of the Burman dynasty called Bhojo Burman. His name figures at the top as the principal ruler, ruling from Bikramapur, which is present-day Bikrampur, in the Dhaka, Bikrampur, Faridpur area of Bangladesh. What does it talk about? It talks about the arrangement for cash deposits to a particular shrine called Vihara. Whenever the term Vihara is there, it means it does not apply to any Brahmanical shrine. It means either a Buddhist or a Jain shrine. Though the ruler, Bhoja Burman, is a devout Vaishnava ruler, his forefathers were also Vaishnava rulers, we have evidence that still in the under the Vaishnava ruling house, several Buddhist manuscripts were being copied. So the presence of Buddhist Biharas is not something striking. It is quite commonplace. But who the deity to be enshrined in the Vihara, it's called Allah Bhattaraka Swami. It's called Allah Bhattaraka Swami Bihare. The Bihara dedicated to Allah Bhattaraka Swami. Now, Bhattaraka Swami is an honorific. It's an expression of honor, devotion to the divinity. And the divinity is Allah. This is the earliest known sanskritized form of Allah, which means that already there has been Muslim merchants in coastal Bengal, and they are accommodated and patronized by a Vaishnava ruler, in whose land there must have been several Buddhist viharas. So there is no term for a masjid. It's called vihara because of the familiarity of that land with the non-Brahmanical places of worship called the viharas in Buddhist and Jaina tradition. What is very significant, I'm not getting into the details of it, very interesting inscription. The Sanskrit inscription says the endowment in cash, which was actually given in cowrie shells, to the maintenance of this particular religious structure is to be maintained in perpetuity. Anyone causing any hindrance to this arrangement is inflicted with a curse that his father would be reduced or cast as a donkey, as an ass. Gardhabastesham pitehi. Their fathers will be reduced to ass. And very interestingly, you might see on the right hand side, on my left, there is an etching of a donkey figure. So the curse is uttered both in script and also in an image in favor of the protection of a shrine meant for Allah. This is the earliest known categoric representation of Muslim merchants coming to this coast of Bengal, and the remarkable promotion of cultural plurality, which is a hallmark of any coastal pockets in the subcontinent. And this actually precedes by at least 6 decades the Ghurid, the Turco-Afghan conquest of Gaur that happened in 1205. It is 1145, at least 60. And following Sebastian Prange, who, what we find in the inscription is emblematic of what is called monsoon Islam. Similar things were happening outside the subcontinent. We have many South Indian inscriptions far beyond Tamil Nadu, in Tamil. Tamil inscriptions in Sri Lanka, Tamil Sinhala inscription in Sri Lanka, Tamil Javanese inscriptions in Maritime Southeast Asia, Tamil inscriptions at Takuapa, which is Peninsula Thailand, almost at the what is called the Isthmus of Kra. You have Tamil inscriptions also at Bagan or Pagan in Myanmar. But many of these inscriptions are bilingual, which also speak a typical feature of not merely commercial transactions, but cultural transactions too. And this is a typical example, the Tamil version of a bilingual Tamil Chinese inscription from east coast of China, which is dated in 1281. It speaks first wishing the good health of the Chinese ruler, who probably is the southern China ruler Kublai Khan. And then it talks of patronizing by a Chinese, the trading group from the South Indian Tamil speaking trading group, patronizing a Shiva temple in east coast of China. I would point out to another fascinating, there are many such examples. I'll briefly touch upon a remarkable inscription coming from Somnath. By the very pronouncing the word Somnath, immediately brings the memory of what is described in many medieval texts. Sultan, the Ghaznavid raid in 1025-26, the destruction of the temple, the famous Shiva temple at Somnath, and the spoliation of the temple when Mahmud going back to Ghazna with huge amount of booty. It is often projected as the very end, not only the end of Somnath, but also projected almost the dark days descending upon ancient India or early medieval India. The beginning of the darkness of medieval. Completely wrong understanding. I am referring to an inscription which I have not shown here, 1264, once again a bilingual inscription. A very elaborate description in Sanskrit and the synoptic part in Arabic. Please note that at 1264, and Gujarat at the time is not being ruled by the Gujarat Sultanate following the invasion of 1296 invasion of Alauddin Khalji. It is very much under the Solanki rulers of Gujarat. Somnath, in addition to a very major sacred center, is also a major port in Kathiawar area. That was first indicated by Al-Biruni. And this inscription speaks, I'm making it very brief, the patronage of building a mosque. In Sanskrit now it is called Mijigiti, by a Hormuzi, Nakhuda obviously from the Persian Gulf area, to Somnath. He appears to have come to Somnath very regularly, and as a pious Muslim he wished to build a mosque there with the helping hand of the local Indic merchants, one of whom is called Chara, his bosom friend, and the two are called in this Dharma Bandhava, righteous friends. Please do not consider by the word Dharma one has converted to another's religion. No, it's called righteous friend, Dharma Bandhava. And there, the first Sanskrit reference to Makkah and Medina as very sacred centers of Islam, Masha Medina, sacred centers. So Somnath in 1264 is, and there is an interesting figure called Tripurantaka, who is an important Shaiva Pashupata priest, who is also at that moment the head of the town council of Somnath. He endorses all the patronage and the land procured for the making of the mosque, which is then approved of by the provincial authority at Kathiawar area. Then it is finally endorsed by Baghel Arjunadeva, the apex political authority of the Solanki Gujarat. So this is a fascinating example. I shall point out two more things. In this kind of a record, there is a typical invocation to the deity for whom the structure is built. Allah is described in Sanskrit by four epithets: Vishwarupa, universal; Vishwanatha, Lord of the world; and then he is also called Shunyarupa, aniconic, formless, and therefore invisible but also everywhere visible, Lakshya. And there the Prophet Muhammad is described as the Bodhaka, preceptor of all Naujanas, maritime people. Who these are? The shipowning groups, Nakhuda Nauvittaka, and the sailors, the crew, Navika Karmakara. So this is how Somnath was operating. And in 1287, what we saw in Tripurantaka, he is now even a more important figure as a very lead major Shaiva Pashupata priest. So there is no end of Somnath in 13th century. It's a vibrant center, both as a commercial center and as a Shaiva Pashupata center. That is their premier character. It's a very major sacred center. With this, I'll very quickly talk about something happening in the early 15th century, the 7 official Ming voyages. You can see the map here, starting from Nanjing in China, then through the South China Sea, it reaches both Java and Srivijaya, that is Palembang region in Sumatra, then through the Malacca Straits, It comes to Ceylon, Sri Lanka. 8 times it visited Calicut, and 4 times at least to Chittagong, showing how these two were held in importance by the Ming authority. It is a state-sponsored expedition, 7 times spanning for 3 decades. And you can also see it reached Aden, it reached Mombasa in East Africa coast, it also reached Hormuz at the very opening of the Persian Gulf. And this is happening at least more than 6 decades before Vasco da Gama came. So what I have so far told will immediately make it clear there is no discovery of the Indian Ocean with the coming of the Portuguese. Vasco da Gama had no clue after circumnavigating Cape of Good Hope by following the west coast of Africa as per the itinerary given in 1488 by Bartholomew Diaz. That part was known, the west coast of Africa was explored. But then rounding of the Cape, then it's for Vasco da Gama, it was a mare incognito. He had to take the help of an Indian Ocean pilot and then reach from Malindi then sailing east, touching Calicut in 1498. So that does not indicate any geographical discovery, as is very clear, sort of lauded that the standard textbook item, that with the coming of Vasco da Gama, the age of discovery begins in the Indian Ocean. Far from it. Indian Ocean has been already traversed very regularly, right from East Africa coast to the Mediterranean linkage through Egypt, entire area over the Western Indian Ocean, and right up to Southeast Asian islands, if not even up to the east coast of China. This is the Indian Ocean maritime zone, even though China is actually outside, is in East Asia and does not fall in the Indian Ocean geographical space, but the contact between the East Asian coastal areas via Southeast Asia into the main arena of the Indian Ocean is absolutely clear. Now, as we know, I have given you one interesting image of Portuguese Goa. Now, this is a major change. Vasco da Gama's arrival is not an important point in Indian history, but it is an important time for the Indian Ocean sailing practices, because for the first time now an all-sea route is made available from North Atlantic right up to the Indian seaboards. Before that, you have to combine either from the Persian Gulf network, then take Euphrates-Tigris network, then into Aleppo, and ultimately then into the Mediterranean areas, or you go by Red Sea, get into Egypt by overland and riverine route, and then cross from Alexandria into the Mediterranean. There is now an all-sea route linking the North Atlantic space with the Indian Ocean. It also ended, to considerable extent, the remarkable ties between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean. The main linkage with the West till 1500 was the Mediterranean and the linkage through Egypt or the network to Persian Gulf. That was snapped up. The importance of the Mediterranean network will gradually go down. And then something striking appears. Goa has been taken as the capital of Portuguese Estado da India, and the entire sea space from Lisbon to first to Goa, then all the areas conquered in the Indian Ocean area up to Malacca 1511, then even up to Macau, close to Hong Kong. Entire area is described as the property as belonging to the crown of Portugal, with Goa as the headquarters of Estado de India. Before that, Goa virtually has no, it was an important port, but there is no long history of Goa standing as a very center of a vast maritime empire. The sea was never considered in Indic context nor in greater West Asiatic context, Asiatic context, as an arena for as claiming the sea space as a sovereign space to be claimed, contested, fought like the land space. This is the Portuguese scenario. I am not telling that there was no violence in the Indian Ocean. The piracy was quite rampant, including in the coastal areas. But Goa suddenly loomed large, and that's why some historians called it an eccentric center. Goa, without having any long history, not much of the hinterland under its possession, but now the center formation from a maritime point of view, Goa looms large as an eccentric center. And then in the very early times, I'm now showing some of the images, and particularly the engagement of conflictual engagements in the ocean, which is a new element with sails and guns. The Portuguese ships, the carracks and the caravels, are of a different type and having very heavy guns on them. This is a much later, about mid-17th century painting of the very famous Battle of Dew, 1509, in February. Battle between the Portuguese fleet under the commander, the Admiral Almeida, with the combined flotilla of the Gujarat Sultan ruler, of Mameluke Egypt, and the Zamorin of Calicut. The battle went in favor. It's a very major battle to indicate, at least in some parts of the Indian Ocean, the primacy of Portuguese naval power. And also there was, I must point out that Mameluke Egypt also did not have a major fleet. The wherewithal was supplied by the Venice, by Venice and its entire maritime fleet and the technology, because Venice was also in very major linkage with this, with Mameluke Egypt. I have also, please see, this is not merely political or history of violence in the sea, but now what we may call the seascapes. Earlier, we have occasionally some sculpture, say from Goa, of the local skirmishes, coastal skirmishes. There are some sculptures, what is called the hero stones from Goa. Maybe one or two such descriptions found in some of the texts. But what is called the seascape with war fleets, and here two ships almost, actually Almeida's ships, nearly colliding with another from other crew, regular paid artists who would capture important moments, particularly sea battles. I'll show other things also. And the sea particularly takes the center stage. I would now point out here, there is something, before I go into the scenario of Portuguese win at the Battle of Dew in 1509. I very briefly touch upon a peculiar attitude. This is the typical Mediterranean and also North Atlantic attitude that the sea is a contestable space over which sovereign rights should be exercised, clamped, and marked out that this sea space belongs to a particular ruler. There is no mark on the sea of a frontier, but there is a claim. And by that, what is called mare clausum, the closed space of the sea, not mare liberatum, not open sea, that this space belongs to a particular political power, mostly seen in a Mediterranean concept and also in the North Atlantic scenario. Now, there is a priesthood to which I shall very briefly talk about. There is a peculiar text of about 1327. It's a crusade text. By 1291, Jerusalem, the Holy Land, is already captured by the Mamluk Sultanate and the Holy Land of the Christendom is lost. A Dominican friar called William of Adam, he once again writes to the Pope urging for a renewed cycle of crusades, but he points that Mamluk Egypt is very powerful. It cannot be immediately defeated by regular wars. The strength of Egypt comes from its economic, particularly maritime trade. So Egypt must be first impoverished. And I'm not getting in the details, but the most striking part of this unusual crusade text, in English it should be considered how to defeat the Saracens. This was published in 2012 in English translation by Giles Constable. I'm not getting it. The most striking and innovative part by this bishop, who probably traveled a lot, including coming to India. He went to Iran after the capture, the fall of the Abbasid Caliphate, went to Ethiopia, and definitely came to India. He mentions 4 major ports of India. One is Koilam, that's Quilon, then talks of Tana, that is Thana near Mumbai, talks of Kambayat, that is Cambay in Gujarat, also talks of Dive Insuli De, most probably this is Diu. In 1327, these ports are mentioned as having in great connectivity with the port of Aden. So this is first of all a prehistory of the importance of Diu and how the battle would be conducted in 1509. But the main point of the bishop is that Indian Ocean and India holds the very central part, the key to the flourishing economy of Egypt, because he says everything coveted in Europe, particularly through Italy, Genoa, Venice, Catalan merchants, all are supplied through the Red Sea network into Egypt and then goes into crossing the Mediterranean in Europe. So he suggests for impoverishment of Egypt, cut off the head, which is here and the Indian, by putting a naval blockade at the island of Socotra, so that Aden will be completely taken out of any sea trade with the Indian ports. So Aden cannot supply anything to Egypt. Egypt will collapse. Then the military intervention into Mamluk Egypt. This was never put to practice. Actually, it was the Portuguese. I do not know if they ever read this account, but the Portuguese at the Battle of Diu, and more important, in 1506, even before 1509, there was Afonso de Albuquerque clamped down a naval blockade exactly at Socotra to finish off Aden. That he was not successful. The Portuguese, even with all their powers, could never bring Aden under their control. Okay, so I have digressed a little bit. Now I come to 2 persons. One is here, Jan Huygen Linschoten. He is known for his published in 1596. He is a Dutch person. Another person, more or less contemporary, is the English merchant, the first English who traveled from England to Asia from 1583 to 1591. I'm starting with the travels of Ralph Fitch. He came not through the typical Cape route, because as an Englishman, the Protestant kingdom of England, and he is coming from England with a letter from Elizabeth I, one to be given to Akbar, the other to be given to the Chinese emperor. He was a merchant, and he came from England, then through Italy, and from Italy crossing the Mediterranean into the Syrian port of Aleppo, not the Cape route. And from there sailed down the overland and then the Tigris-Euphrates route to Persian Gulf, Hormuz. It was by the Portuguese taken to Goa, imprisoned there. From there, Englishman was able to run away. And then gives a description of the river network, nearly 120 country boats plying the Ganga from Allahabad, and he saw the fort of the fort of Allahabad, of the Mughal fort, under construction, sailed down up to Patna, up to Raj Mahal, which is did not get into Bengal Strait, north into North Bengal to Coach Bihar. From Coach Bihar, just a moment. He was trying to reach Tibet, obviously with finding out a passage to China, which he failed. He was in the Coach Bihar region, into Bhutan, then came back through into Bengal, Sadgaon, goes to Chittagong, from Chittagong goes to Pegu, then into Southeast Asia, finally comes back once again through Goa, through Cochin, and from Cochin he goes into once again by the same route, Persian Gulf route, and goes back via to England. That was 1583 to 1591. By late 16th century, he published his account, The Travels of Ralph Fitch. And please note the contemporaneity of Jan Huwen Linschoten's work, Itinerario. This guy was actually, he's a Dutchman, but was in service at Goa with the Archbishop of Goa. He secretly, surreptitiously copied all the Portuguese maps and sea charts in the Indian Ocean, and then virtually he smuggled it out of Goa, reaches back his homeland in Holland and in Amsterdam, and within 6-7 years he brings out the Itinerario with all the sea charts, maps, and this is a very major break. What we saw before, the map which is called in the Book of Curiosities, is not a perfect cartographical map. Now we have the map, but no longer with a description. The knowledge of sea is now part and parcel of political expansion with establishment of commercial monopoly. So therefore, there is a knowledge explosion. What I would say earlier, it was the description of the sea and the ports, what I would call thalassography. Now it is thalassology, paving or as a mechanism for establishing thalassocracy. In Holland, by this time, there is a remarkable collaboration among the businessmen, the shipbuilders, the financiers, and the map makers. When the contents of Itinerario came, then there is a flood of knowledge available to the Dutch. And then the Dutch follows the Portuguese and starts the Portuguese-Dutch fighting over Asian positions. Please note, 1596 Itinerario is published, 1602 Dutch East India Company VOC has come into existence. Similarly, about close to 1595-96, the troubles of the foundation of English East India Company. That will tell us what's going on. I would point out another interesting. So far, all the movements in the Indian Ocean still very much in the form of the monsoon-driven. I'll come once again back to this first map. Along the Indian Ocean monsoon zone, it was in about 1606-7, very shortly after the establishment of the Dutch East India Company, a Dutch captain, Hendrik van Brouwer, instead of rounding the Cape of Good Hope, he decided to go straight south down into the southern Indian Ocean, almost an uncharted sea. He obviously got the information from local sources that there is a very strong wind called the Roaring Forties. With that, now there is no landmass, and he could take cross towards the south and then to the east, reaching the west coast of Australia, which was called in early times New Holland. From there, you go straight north up and reach maritime Southeast Asia, particularly Java, which became very soon the Dutch East Indies colony and the establishment of Batavia. And this was indicated as the quickest possible movement in Asia, and this space has no contestation, no Portuguese intervention. And even there was the instruction to reach Java, not through the usual route of the Strait of Malacca, but through the southern coast of Sumatra, entering into the Sunda Strait through the south. So there is no Portuguese intervention with their base at Malacca Strait and Malacca. And that actually, for the first time, there is an attempt partial attempt at as an alternative to the monsoon-driven sailing system. But when the Dutch would come into the network of what they call Asian trade, that is from Batavia into various parts of Asia, then you have to follow the regimes of the monsoon. One such case is Surat, the great port of Gujarat under Mughal rule. And this is the image of Surat. Once again, see the typical European presentation of the ports, which is normally not seen in Indic, whether in Mughal painting or any other Deccanese painting or earlier the Cholo sculpture, nothing like that. So it is also called Surat. Surat is also mentioned. Typical ships, European ships with their typical flags of different nations, along with the indigenous boats. You can see there is no harbor structure. The ships are standing at the distant road state, and the small local watercrafts will go back and forth from the ships in the mid-sea, that is the roadstead, into the actual port of Surat, which is a riverine port, actually, not exactly on the sea. Similarly, we can show the image of the Dutch factory at Chinsura, to the north of Kolkata, the famous painting by Hendrik van Schulenburg. It shows what is called the Dutch Kuti, what is now Chuchura. It no longer the official is possibly part of the present building, and you can see the typical landscape has nothing to do with the Indian style. This is the figure of the ships, large ships on the Ganga, and the elaborate structure. It's almost a fortified settlement. I'm not getting in, but now these are becoming the portrayals of the ports. And later, this is an early 18th century English East India Company painting of the port of Calcutta, which is from Saptagram down to Chinsura. You have also the famous Portuguese church at Bandel, and then come to Kolkata, Calcutta at the time. And please note, it is not the typical figure of a naval battle, but the moment European ships are shown along with their flags, invariably would be shown the booming guns, indicating the ship's power. The guns and sails, these are now the two major components of the shipping pattern. Similarly, I'll go very quick here, the port of Madras, also in early East India Company painting. You will once again see in the very distant background, the ships are in the roadstead. While what is called beaching, there is no port structure here, nothing, the port structure. And the local coastal community people are pulling the dinghy type of small vessels, which are going back and forth between the beach, actually beaching, you can see here. And far in the background, you can see Fort St. George with the English East India Company's flag aloft in the air. By the mid-18th century, with the victory over the Battle of Plassey, what was a vast joint stock company, the English East India Company, with its mandated from the British Parliament that it could start monopoly business and also can establish political power for mandated to hold political power, now is established. What led Tagore to, in a famous poem, he said, overnight, the weighing scale in the hands of the merchant turned into the rod of rulership with the victory of the English East India Company under Clive. Now they become the rulers of Bengal. Gradually, that, as has been pointed out, Bengal is the British bridgehead. And then by 1842, you have the steam frigate, it's called Semiramis, built by the very well-known Parsi millionaire shipbuilders, Nauroji Jamsetji Wadia. This is the it's a major Bombay shipbuilding yard, but now with the steamship, though there is a backing of the sails, but now with the steamship, the age-old dependence over many millennia, at least 5,000 years, the complete dependence on monsoon in sailing the Indian Ocean will be a thing of the past. And with that, the emergence of the seaborne colonial empire of the English East India Company, which between mid-18th century to about for the next 80-90 years, this was actually controlling more than half of uh, of the world's trade in cotton, silk, indigo, sugar, saltpeter. Salt also. Saltpeter is essential for as the gunpowder, guns and sails, as I pointed out, and also opium. Opium, you may know through by at least reading, apart from history books, Amitav Ghosh's the trilogy on the opium supply to China, because Chinese tea and porcelain were so coveted in England, but there was little, even in late 18th century, early 19th century, that the balance could be reached by bringing British or English or European goods. So opium from North India would be exported to China, and then beginning of the Opium War, famous Opium War. The point is now the high noon of the overseas colonial empires, and even by around late 16th, early 17th century, the European presence was already there from the North Atlantic, but they were unable to replace what may be called the Indian Ocean trading structure. They had to receive the collaboration of Asian and indigenous Indic communities, including the moneylenders, including the textile producers. If China was sending silk all over the world, India was clothing the then world to a great extent by its massive textile production. The Dutch East India Company was taking out from all the spices from Spice Island in maritime Southeast Asia, but how to offset the balance, what the Dutch would give. That would be through the inter-Asian trade from Coromandel, the printed cotton cloth, also from Bengal, the Bengal silk. That would be taken to Southeast Asia, and with that also payment will be made. So now India and China up to even late 17th century, according to the recent statistical, probably contributed to almost 25% of the world GDP. Now with the establishment of different European colonial powers, Dutch, English, French, and what happened? What was the wars in the European scenario, including wars in the Atlantic, would be transferred onto the Indian Ocean positions, and even in Indian subcontinent. The spilling over of the wars in European landscape would come to Indian situation. And as it is gradually, with the farm control of the English East India Company, and later from 1861 onwards, bringing the entire subcontinent under the rule directly of Empress Victoria, the development of the underdevelopment is in full swing. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. I now request everyone to put forward their doubts and queries, if any, or they can write down the question and I can read it aloud. If anyone has any queries or doubts.
There is no comments, no questions. I think I have put people to sleep. PPT of the presentation. I might share something. I can forward it to Ayush, with whom I am in with uh, email exchange. I don't mind sharing it, but at the same time, you have to read certain background, because I merely showed some images, largely images, without any kind of explanatory notes in that. For that, you may have to pick up the adequate reading on the subject. I have deliberately taken a very long overview since the topic was early medieval and beyond. I can send it, as I said, I can share the PPT with Ayush, and Ayush can reach out to anyone who asks for it. I have no problem.
Any more questions as such or doubts? There's a question.
The saltpeter. There is the horses. Horses. I'll start with horse. I do not know much about saltpeter. As I said, that saltpeter is connected with the gunpowder, and gunpowder was actually first discovered and put to use in China, not in India. But the area around Bihar, what is also Jharkhand today, partly North Bengal, is almost the best possible saltpeter was available, which is indispensable for the firing of cannon. So when the European companies, please keep it in mind, the European companies themselves were often fighting among themselves. Also, they were fighting, say, in Southeast Asia, sometimes over West Asian situations. In Sri Lanka, the Portuguese were driven off first by the Dutch, then by the English. The French and the British English were constantly in war, in both in South India, also in Bengal. So they needed gunpowder, the firepower, and saltpeter was there. I do not know much, but horses, as I said, horses were one of the most coveted war machineries. Until the coming of the petroleum-driven vehicles, horses provided the fastest means of communication, both for civil purposes, for also on the battlefield. And I'll only tell you one thing. Even the English East India Company found that importing horses, say from Persian horses, Arabic horses from West Asia, whether by the Red Sea route or even by the Persian Gulf route, were prohibitively costly. They also tried to bring horses from Australia, which has already turned into a convict colony for Britain. But that too proved extremely costly. And the company was naturally fighting lots of war, and they needed to economize. So there is, I think I forgot the name, it's an excellent work. In Bihar, they opened up a stud farm, Pusa stud farm, an agricultural farm where they tried to hybridize the local or indigenous horses with the imported horses. It miserably failed. There was no good quality horses. So the importation of horses as immense cost was almost inevitable and unavoidable. That was very much there. Yes, Devankita has something to ask, I find. Yes, please, Devankita.
Yes, sir. So thank you for the presentation. So, based on what you're talking about, saltpeter.
Just you go on speaking. I have to give fresh charge to my
Okay,
laptop.
okay.
Please go on.
So,
Go on, go on.
was it the Chinese? I mean, I have read in an article somewhere on the broader perspective of Asian connections. So there it was written that basically Chinese, because of Chinese technological innovations and this gunpowder. I mean, yeah, technological innovations, because of the gunpowder and compass, uh,
Ah, you
actually
are very right.
diffused from China to Europe and Asian lands, that actually changed the maritime nature of the Indian Ocean. Sir, was it always the Chinese technological innovations, like as you said that Bengal, etc., Jharkhand, etc., were also contributing into the production of gunpowder? So it was both,
Not
right?
gunpowder, saltpeter.
Saltpeter,
Saltpeter
sorry.
is essential for what is called in, I do not know the Hindi word, called shora, gandhak actually. So that is a major component uh, for making gunpowder. So that raw material was in great demand, and that did not actually happen in a large scale before 18th century. Slightly even maybe late 17th, but not before 18th century on a grand scale.
Okay.
So that is one point, and the Chinese fleet, even of the Zhenghe fleet, we have some image illustrations of that kind of ships the Chinese were using in early 15th century, even in the first half of the 15th. These are massive ships. In terms of size, the Portuguese ships are almost like very small aircrafts vis-a-vis the wide-bodied massive aircrafts of today. But later, the Dutch made very major changes, and they were perhaps bringing the best possible ship designs to come into from the Atlantic to the Indian Ocean and also to Southeast Asia. Please also note that we are more aware of what is called the Dutch East India Company. There was also a Dutch West Indies Company, which was in the Caribbean. And one which I did not actually find the time to talk about, one of the terrible things of the European scenario is the slave trade, which the Portuguese did for the Arakanese ruler, capturing large number. It was regular raid of the Portuguese Armada, which is then coming into Bengali language, Harmad, and picking up large number of indigenous communities to be either taken to Southeast Asia and particularly then to West Africa. From West Africa, then to the Caribbeans. And please note, by this time, the Portuguese and the Spanish control of many parts of what is called now Latin America. And with the Spanish control over South America, the vast reserve of South American silver began to reach Indian Ocean, not through the Atlantic's route, but by now the connectivity through the Pacific world. It reaches Manila, that is in Philippines, which was a Spanish colony. And then it flows into the further west into South China Sea, then into Southeast Asia, then a very heavy influx of Latin American, South American silver into the subcontinent.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Devankita Das. Sir, we have another two questions in the chat box.
Please.
Mr. Somadip Bardhan has asked a
I got
question.
on Fatimid and India. There is, if you say in terms of the ties between rulers, then it is difficult to point out, but the merchants were regularly moving in and out, both from the subcontinent to the other parts of the Indian Ocean, and merchants from the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, including Fatimid Egypt. And the Fatimid Egypt major importance is in its role both in the Red Sea area and also the Mediterranean. And the Mediterranean contact is very much dominated by the Catalan, the Genoese, and the Venetian merchants. Venice is actually a is a maritime entity, full-fledged maritime entity. And so many of the commodities, as the crusade text pointed out, all the commodities coveted in Italy are actually routed through the Red Sea, then into Egypt. From Egypt's Alexandria, Venetian merchants, Catalan and Genoese merchants were taking it out into the mainland of Europe, particularly pine cloths and also the Malabar black pepper, and obviously various types of textiles. So that is always there, but it is the reach out of the ports. Say in 1511, the Portuguese account of Toma Pires speaks of Cambay, the great port of Gujarat, telling that Cambay has two arms, one arm reaching out to Aden, the other arm reaches out to Malacca. No other port in Asia had this kind of forelands. That is his categoric statement. And Malacca is something of a great entrepot, which the Portuguese coveted. In 1511, with the capture of Malacca from the Sultanate by the Portuguese and establishment of control over Malacca. Please note that in Indian Ocean, I should point it out since the issue came up, it is in the control over the sea. It is usually most advantageous if you have sea straits, because their body of water is very narrow, not the wide open sea space, and it is easier to control and turn it into a choke point, like the Gibraltar, the Strait of Gibraltar. In the Indian Ocean arena, there is the only two or three major such sea straits which can be used, to borrow an expression from Michael Pearson, that is a choke point. One is close to Aden, the Bab el-Mandab, then the Hormuz, Strait of Hormuz, then the Strait of Malacca. All are pretty far away from the Indian mainland. Closest to the Indian mainland is a Pock Strait, which is so narrow that it is really not fit for big ships to navigate. So that is virtually of no use. So the moment Malacca is taken over by the Portuguese, Toma Pires says, whoever has control over Malacca has his hands over the throat of Venice, because the Portuguese came to break the monopoly both of Venetian merchants, their very premier role, and also the Arab Muslim merchants' dominance in the spice trade. The Portuguese are mainly looking for an alternative route and capturing the spice trade monopoly, and then also looking for Christians.
So we have more questions here from Prakriti Pal and Shritilata Santra.
Yeah, may I have the questions? Either they can speak or they might put it up in the chat box. May I have the questions, please?
So there is a question from Will Kamal Tagore.
Yes,
Can you
please.
highlight the connection between Central Asian Silk Route caravan trade and the maritime trade of the Indian Ocean?
Oh, yes, that's a very important question. I'm very happy that this has been raised. 2 points. One, say Central Asian the Central Asian overland connectivity is always very significant because both for some of the products coming from coastal areas would reach out to Central Asia and even to China. Take, for example, how did Xuanzang came to South Asia? Coming from China across the vast space of Central Asia. He was following what is called Silk. And please, also one point, Silk Road is not a single road. It's a system of a very large number of overland arteries of communication. From East Asia to South Asia to West Asia and even reaching out then towards the Mediterranean. And the term Silk Road is actually a 19th century coinage. It was never called Silk Road in ancient times. It is German geographer gave the name Seidenstrasse. Seiden means silk, silk street or Silk Road, Seidenstrasse. From there we use the word Silk Road. But the most important point is that of the horses, which the prime horses would come from Central Asia. But then, apart from the horses, a recent work probably published about two years back, 2020, something like that, by a person called Jagjit Lali, who teaches possible in Birkbeck College or London University, exactly forgot. He writes a book on the importance of Central Asian overland routes overall in Asian history, not merely in the olden times, even in the 19th and late 18th, 19th and 20th century. By this time, two major European powers are having major imperial ambitions, not merely over the sea space, but also over the vast continental space. One is the English East India Company, later under the British Empire, and also Russian Empire. Both are trying to bring the Central Asian overland connectivity, and there is a graphic account how important is the northwestern area, including the Punjab of India, and also in the undivided India, the importance of the Sindh area, which is an outlet to the landlocked area. And the overland trade is almost a coveted, it's a battle of, it's a bone of contention between two expanding empires, the British Empire and the Russian Empire, who are trying to also establish their hold over the continental space, not merely over the coastal areas. So Jagjit Lali's book brings it out very clearly, the importance of Central Asian connectivity in the making of the British Empire, and also how the Russian Empire was coming into Central Asia and trying. That's why the great urge for the British Empire to control Afghanistan, particularly Kabul, the fear of the great Russian bear.
Thank you, sir. So we have another question here. While some sultanates engaged in trade, they relied on foreign powers like Portuguese for naval protection. Why wouldn't they develop their own?
Can you please repeat? I missed the first part. Sorry.
While some sultanates engaged in trade, they relied on foreign powers like Portuguese for naval protection. Why wouldn't they develop their own naval force?
Thank you very much. This is something, it is part of the political culture. at least in the case of India, the political culture is that sovereignty is expressed, established, contested over the land space. The sea is not seen as an arena for contestation and establishing power and authority and expressing sovereignty. One may like it or not like it, that is not the question. The question is, this is the political culture. I'll give you one example. We have talked about 1509, the Battle of Diu. The Gujarat Sultan joined hands with the Egyptian navy, also with Zamorin's fleet. In 1535, the Portuguese were already playing havoc in the coastal western India, in the Gujarat coast, and obviously a menace. They were asking for monopoly over the sea, which was completely an idea foreign to all the Asian and Indic players. Even the pirates consider the sea space for their looting and their way of survival, but they were on the other hand not sort of claiming for land. In 1530s, when there was the ruler Bahadur Shah, Sultan Bahadur, not Bahadur Shah Zafar of the last Mughal Empire, I'm not talking of him, around 1536, Bahadur Shah Zafar was, Bahadur Shah, the Gujarati Sultan, was urged by many of the important courtiers that the Firangis, that the Portuguese, were getting too problematic and they should be taught a lesson. If they're playing havoc on the sea, the Sultan should also fit out the ships available somewhere and then fight them out from the sea and the port in Gujarat. The Sultan was furious. He said, moving in the sea and fighting on the sea is the matter of the Saudagar. I am a Sultan, I am not a Saudagar. Let them fight me on the land. So that is the political attitude and culture. So there is no inherent tendency to control certain sea space. So there is no sea law. Even the Egyptian sea laws, the Islamic sea laws, which has been worked upon by Hassan Khalili, he also says that even the Fatimid rulers considered the Red Sea, partly in the Mediterranean, as the open sea, mare liberatum, not mare clausum. So that is the political attitude. The sea is not meant for political contestation at all. I know there is now some revisionist historiography which are telling that Indian Ocean world was not entirely free from violence. Maybe there are cases, particularly a maritime polity like Srivijaya in Sumatra could extract revenue, could detain a ship, but backed by a newly coming up capitalist system, backed by state power, that kind of naval intervention is a completely different operation than the piratical operations and, say, the ruler of Kish. He is very rapacious and is trying to control the sea passage in the Gulf of, in the Strait of Hormuz. The ruler of Srivijaya would try to exploit maximum by controlling Malacca Strait. But these are exceptions to prove the rule.
So we have one last question from Somadeep.
Yeah, please.
We have seen the use of several bills of exchange and other instruments of transaction for trade during the period of commercial revolution in Europe and in India. We have seen instruments of transactions called hundis, especially during the 15th century. So was the Indian hundis somewhere influenced by the European counterparts, or was it an indigenous invention?
I think hundi is already mentioned in, say, Rajatarangini, very well known. Also in the well-known Gujarati text before 1500 called Lekha Paddhati. and various types of hundis, not one kind of hundi. It is always there. So along with this, by the time of the Mughals, you have the Bima, insurance. And it has been pointed out by Jagjit Singh Lali, and also in the case of the Geniza records, a wonderful essay by Roxani Eleni Margariti, who teaches in Emory University. She is a major authority on these Geniza letters, that though the Geniza letters speak of various types of coins, Egyptian mythicals with Adani dinars, with Zapti dinars, and various other high precious metal coins, yet the business transactions were actually very heavily dealt without actual cash transactions. It was actually, if someone had to clear a credit, it would be against the goods, or payment by the hundis, payment covered by the bima. And hundis by 17th, 18th century became also almost like a promissory note. It could be exchanged from one person to another person. It is kind of a notional currency. So the use of the cash, there are alternatives even in Gujarat. And another alternative to cash, that is minted precious metal currency, is cowrie shells, particularly in the Indian Eastern Ocean. Cowrie shells were widespread from Orissa right up to Bihar, even Uttar Pradesh, and definitely the greater parts of the Northeast, definitely in Brahmaputra Valley, and then farther east, right into the Manipur area. But even the Bengal coast and Orissa coast do not have any native origin of the cowries. All cowries come from Maldives itself. The cowries are marine products, and they're part and parcel of the maritime network. Toma Parish's account would say the shiploads of cowries would come to Bengal, and in their return voyage, they would take back full ballast of the ships loaded with the rice paddy from Bengal, because Maldives is a grain shortage area. So cowries, even in the early 19th century, mid up to the, I think before the 1850s, many of the Bengal zamindars were paying their khazna to the English East India Company by cowries. So cowries are regular alternative currencies, a perennial currency, particularly in Bengal and Eastern India.
All right, everyone. I hope you have enjoyed today's session on changing nature in sea trade. And all the aspirants of knowledge today present here shall cherish each word bestowed by Professor Ranabir Chakravarti. I would like to apologize for any mistakes done here today, and would like to thank respected Professor for your enriching words. With this, we have come to the end of today's session. Wish you a wonderful night ahead. Thank you so much.
I must offer my best of appreciations and many thanks, not only to the organizer and Odisha for sort of anchoring the entire session very patiently and very efficiently, but all the members of the audience, the participants, and for your questions. I'm very thankful to you. On a weekend Saturday evening, you spent around 2 hours, slightly more than that perhaps, for listening to something remotely away from our everyday life and the problems and prospects. Many thanks for making it an interactive session, quite lively. Thank you very much. Good night.
Thank you, sir. Good night.